the best product teams will stay as small as possible, as long as possible. It just becomes too difficult for the product to look and feel like the outcome of a singular, simple vision for what the future could be as you layer more and more and more people into the thing. It was easy to see it was the future. I mean, even in the early days, personal computers were like, memory on them was, from really, these were like 16K, 64K memory computer. But even then, before you had any understanding of Moore's law or anything like that, memory on them was doubling and tripling, regularly. Ease of use was, even the hardware attachments, like silly things like disk drives, were evolving rapidly and becoming smaller quickly, and the whole systems were becoming more powerful and lighter, and on and on and on. So it was pretty easy to see early on that this was part of how the future was going to be built.
Was the discussion at that time like more around, here's how powerful computers could be, or here's like what manual things today it could unlock?
It was much more about the pragmatic uses of computing. There was no discussion, certainly no discussion of things like the Turing test or anything like that. It was just more about how much more easily you'll be able to process data, if you will. Originally people referred to those jobs as data processing. That's what it was for. It was processing reams of data, and manufacturing and accounting and so forth. So it was mostly around the ease and speed with which you would be able to do things like that.
If you fast forward to like over the last 5 to 10 years,
Yep.
Can you describe like this cohort of product builders?
Yeah, to me, this cohort of product builders, and I think feels like a little bit this wave started with Figma, but I'm sure there are lots of other people who aren't Dylan Fields who would disagree with that. There's a much more cohesive understanding of product and design. Instead of the product manager and the design lead, I feel like this cohort of builders have a very clear sense of, design themselves. Maybe, obviously, people would looking at this would say, well, Steve Jobs was the first one, was the first pro in that regard. But when I think about specific folks, I think about, again, Dylan at Figma, Kari at Linear, Kareem at Clay, Nick Sharp at Adio. These are people who don't have their product thought and then a design lead and an engineering lead. They've got the cohesive understanding of the design of the product and its functionality in their mind, and a very clear vision for how that should look and feel in the world. That maps much more closely to how their users will use the product than the previous iteration.
What is it about those people that sort of have cracked that?
The different set of personalities. Obviously, we're generalizing, but I think maybe if you think about, I happened to be at Google in the mid-2000s, 2007, 2008. The product leads were engineers first. In fact, when you interviewed to be in product at Google, they were engineering questions, and algorithm questions, and describe a product that, and it was less about pick an elegant product and then help me think about some design component that's elegant, and why is it elegant? Those were maybe 1 in 40 of the questions that you would get in a product interview. And I think this new wave of, product founders that are building this new cohort of products that just feel like the way you want to build things come from a design-first sensibility, and that includes, everything about that. It's not just the function. What are all the capabilities that we need to build into this product, but what are the things we shouldn't do? Steve Jobs was famously, no is the most important part of strategy. What are the things we shouldn't build into this? He famously, again, referred to himself as an editor. Like, first we have to remove all the things that people are going to ask for that we shouldn't put in there. And I think this cohort, again, of great product founders thinks a lot about what are the, where are we not going to go, and why shouldn't we go there, even if there's demand to go there.
The quality bar, as you're mentioning, like in our circles just feels so high. How do you personally define like what makes an excellent product versus just an okay one?
Let's see. I don't know that I have a strict definitional way of thinking about it. What I generally look for is products that come along that instead of you have to change the way you work to fit to the product understands this is the way people want to do these things, and let's just let them work do the work the way they want to in the product. Again, Figma is the great sort of canonical first wave example of let's just design it here and then it does it the way we designed it here because it's what you see is what you get. Instead of let's do a wireframe and then run it and then move it over here and see how it actually works. Products that work that way instead of you having to pound a square peg into a round hole are the new wave. Again, I think of things like Notion and Figma and Linear. Instead of like, I got to do all this process work to fit to the product and then move it over to the way I work. The product works the way you work. One of the great challenges in a larger product organization is it becomes difficult for it to continue to be the singular vision of the product founder. Again, Jobs was great at this, but it becomes challenging. And secondly, I wasn't the product founder at Twitter. Jack Dorsey was the inventor of the product. So Jack was still chairman of the company, but he's not there every day. And I feel like becomes a certain point in these companies where it's impossible for it to feel like it's the result of a singular vision anymore. And there are lots of reasons why that is, and you can debate all of them, but the longer that product founders can hold on to that, the better. I had a discussion with a product founder the other day who's still the head of product and also the head of engineering. It was kind of having a discussion around, at some point it's getting to, everybody reports to me, it's not sustainable. And my comment was, give up head of engineering before don't give up head of product right yet. Like the product looks and feels the way it does because of you. Bringing in a vice president of product is just going to make them and you miserable and will create dilution between your vision for what this thing currently is and people love. And, so don't do that, right? You're going to offload something, offload VP of engineering. The things that get in the way and cause it to become, a shell of its former self, if you will, are the company begins to subjugate the beauty and quality of the product to the need to monetize it. I mean, look at Google search today. It's ads. And, they didn't, when they started monetizing, AdWords, they didn't say, I can imagine a future where there are 3 pages of ads before the organic search results. It just gets to the point where you're like, we could make a little more money next quarter. And again, nobody says that out loud. It just starts to happen. And, the longer you can hold on to what's the way we can monetize this in the most organic way without subjugating the original vision for the product to that, the better. But it's not just monetization that gets in the way. Dogma gets in the way. Remember at Twitter, when I first got there, people would walk around and say, you have to tweet in order to really get and understand Twitter. So really have to, if you don't actively publish, it's hard to get it. It's hard to comprehend what it's for. So there was a long time where people just walked around saying that. And then, it turns out when you actually went and looked at the data, I remember thinking, why do we believe that? Well, because, so-and-so says. And then you hire the next person, and that person tells them, and they think, well, so-and-so's been here forever, and they say you have to, it turned out to not be true at all. And of course, as we all know people who are like, yeah, I never tweet at all, but I use it every day. And so that changes the way you think about the product. So I think things like dogma, the dilution of the original singular vision through the necessity of having to create a bigger organization to manage the usage and the growth and the number of customers and on and on and on, and monetization are all things that start to come between that singular vision, that simple vision, and where we are today.
Something we talk about at Linear a lot is like this kind of concept of like the fall of the middle manager. I don't know if that's just startups being idealistic, like we'll never have people managers or all managers are ICs, or if this is actually kind of a real trend that's in service of this quality idea. But I'm curious your take on management layers as it relates to quality and also the trend in managers you're seeing at startups.
Bill Campbell famously at Google, Larry Page, this is very early. Bill Campbell was on the board of Apple and Steve Jobs' close friend, and had been brought in by, I think by John Doerr at Kleiner Perkins, had been brought in to get Larry and Sergey and Eric Schmidt to all be able to work together. You know, Eric Schmidt was brought in as CEO, and so Bill Campbell had been brought in to like help these guys work together. Bill had spun Claris Software out of Apple and built that as a separate company, and so he understood scale and management and so forth. And Larry, early on at Google was, you know, engineers don't want to be managed. They just want to be able to like do their job. You know, Bill was like, huh, okay. And, you know, Bill went out and talked to a bunch of engineers and was like, hey, you know, what's it like, you know, not having any manager? And almost all, you know, the engineers were like, it would be great to like have someone who could help me understand like how what I'm doing fits into the purpose of the organization and like what the priorities are, and because he thinks the priorities are this and that guy thinks the priorities are that, and I don't really know which one of them is right. And I would also like to know what like productivity means for me and my career here and where it all leads to. And you know, Bill went back and told Larry like, yeah, they totally want managers, not people to tell them what to do. You know, and great managers don't tell people what to do. They make sure everybody understands the priorities and how their work and productivity, what it means for both them and the organization. You know, so when you think about management, there are very different ways of thinking about it. And Bill was famously like, stop telling people what to do. You know, that's horrible. But help them understand what the priorities are and make sure they understand what the work means both for themselves and the company. You know, I have a friend of mine that was taking a tour of a Tesla factory. He just asked some guy on the shop floor of Tesla who's, you know, screwing things in, like, you know, talk about like your job. And the guy knew, he didn't just talk about, well, I'm the guy that screws the bolt in on this thing. He talked about like, the reason we do this way, what I'm doing right now, is because, and understood how it fit into the purpose and mission of Tesla. That's a great understanding of management. Someone has helped that person understand what we're trying to do here is make sure we achieve this outcome, not screw 8 of those in a day.
I'd be curious your perspective on how user research or the understanding of users is changing and the role of it nowadays for founders or for people who are building products.
I maybe have a little bit of a contrarian point of view on that, which is I don't know that it matters to the great product founders. I don't know that they think of it that way. I think the great product founders have a very specific point of view and opinion that's theirs, and that's what the product looks like. Not, I went and talked to 18 people and they told me this about their lives and that helped me understand what I want to build. I think the great product founders don't come at it that way. They come at it from, I'm tired of blah, blah, pounding the square peg into a round hole, and I see in my mind how this thing could be elegant and simple and meet me where I am in my work, and I'm gonna go create that.
I want to talk a little bit about what you're seeing, like trends you're seeing and how we're changing the way we're building or how we're changing the way we're working. What do you think in the future the most successful product teams will be doing differently, if anything?
The best product teams will stay as small as possible, as long as possible. It just becomes too difficult for the product to look and feel like the outcome of a singular, simple vision for what the future could be unless you're a Steve Jobs, as you layer more and more and more people into the thing. It's just hard. So I think the best product teams are the product founder is the product manager and the product leader as long as possible. Maybe there are more engineers and maybe there are more, back end, architects reducing latency or what have you in the product. But the best products are the result of a single product leader's vision for what this can and should be. And they are always the best people to understand what we shouldn't do. Because lots of times there get to be a chorus of users who want, X, Y, Z, and doing that one thing doesn't change the product dramatically. But again, look at an Instagram or a Facebook. Instagram specifically, once Kevin Systrom is pulled out of Instagram, it wouldn't hurt to just add a, direct message button here. Yeah. Lots more people use it when you can direct message people. It's just one thing, and then next thing you know, there are buttons all, hamburger menu at the top left, buttons along the bottom.
How tactically do you advise founders actually achieve that?
Offloading everything but that is, when you get, you shouldn't run product and engineering anymore. Get a director of engineering to manage and organize engineering, but trying to keep product as lean as possible for as long as possible. And hey, you don't have to, as you might imagine, and again, probably because of people like Steve Jobs, Steve loved to have his hands in marketing, and was sort of famously involved in it. Those are things that I would encourage, the product founder to hey, there's gonna come a point where you can't do all the marketing anymore either. And they're like, but when so-and-so does it, it's hideous and ugly and feels like a crappy ad campaign. I'm like, well, better that than you not being in charge, being responsible for thinking about the product all the time. The great product founders want to always be involved in the marketing because that's the way we talk about the product is the product. I get it. And I totally agree with that. I'm just saying there comes a point in the life of the company, almost certainly, where you have to have some people who are doing most of that. And you're reviewing it or something, but not that's obviously stupid, and I'm going to go home tonight and spend all my time redrawing the print ad for the back of the Wall Street Journal. You should be spending your time on the actual thing the customer is going to use and feel. I'm just saying, as you sacrifice things, sacrifice anything but I'm responsible for what the product looks and feels like. As you grow a company, in the absence of you as the founder, CEO, or whoever's running the company, at Twitter, I wasn't the founder, I was the CEO. At Twitter, as we grew, had to constantly work against the organic nature of the organization to slow down as it grew. Why does that happen? Communication architecture is like telephone. Play again a game of telephone at a dinner table. You're like, okay, now there's 1,000 people in the company. How do I make sure that everyone understands what I understand as quickly as possible? I articulate some decision to a director of engineering. The director of engineering turns around and articulates that beautifully to the manager. The manager turns around and says, Dick says do this. And then you've got someone in the New York office running around thinking Dick's crazy, and he makes these arbitrary and capricious decisions, and God only knows why. So one, in order the organization to move as quickly as possible, you really have to work hard against the natural tendency of the organization to slow down. So one of the ways we used to do that is launching an experiment at Twitter. I don't remember the exact time frame right now, but launching an experiment in the Twitter product to 1% of users to test some hypothesis took at one point 14 weeks. So, we would instead of just of course, it didn't originally take that long, which just grew and grew and grew organically. So we would start to do things like, why does X at Twitter take this long? And not and instead of the question, well, what would have to be true for it to be, 12 weeks? And then people if you do that, people start to come up with, well, the reason we have to do this is we can't really stop doing that. The right way to think about that is, what would have to be true for it to be 2 weeks? And then you're you forces people to I'm not saying that we're going to do it, but what would have to be true for it to be 2 weeks? And what you end up finding is that it can totally be 2 weeks. Things that are true now in the organization have to not be true. For example, The designers don't have to build wireframes for an engineer to be able to launch something to 1%. It can be the engineer's shitty design. We just want to see if this thing works. So great, you just took out X, steps. And we're not going to go through the EU privacy review that we have to go through when we launch the full product because we're going to launch it, I'm making this up, we're going to launch it in New Zealand to 1%. So we're not going to do that. And on and on and on, and pretty soon you can launch experiments in 2 weeks. Forcing yourselves to go through those things in a growing organization to work against the natural tendency to slow down is super important. A great way for a company to slow down and for everything to take longer is for people to get in trouble when they make a huge mistake. What happens then? Everyone starts going around asking for permission before they do anything, because they'll go, hey, I asked Dick, and he said, blah, blah. And then I asked the head of trust and safety, because they got mad at me last, and the organization slows down. So you have to help people understand nobody's going to get in trouble for making a mistake. It's the job of leaders to correct mistakes quickly when they happen, not to prevent mistakes from happening.
You talked to a lot of founders and product teams, even with the great ones who are building an excellent product. Is there something you feel they miss, or that you're often giving advice on, either in how they run their teams or what they're prioritizing in building their product?
Yeah, they try to do everything beyond the product for too long, and then it prevents the company from achieving what it could achieve more quickly or more efficiently even. They hold on to, you can say everything's an extension of the product. HR is an extension of, how we work and who we are is an extension of the product. I'm not going to have some, people manager come in here and start managing benefits, or obviously an extreme example. But the great thing about great product founders is they challenge assumptions. And they ask questions like, why is that way? It doesn't have to be that way. And that's how you end up with these beautiful new products. They tend to do that to things like compensation reviews. You're like, okay, let's maybe play around with it. We don't need to reinvent HR again. You see that all the time. I remember speaking with John and Patrick Collison at Stripe years ago, and they're like, why is HR like that? And I was like, oh boy, we're going to go through the whole revisit HR again from the great product founders. It's a pattern, and it happens, but I get it. It's because when I challenged assumption over here, everyone told me I was a genius, and look at what we've done, and blah, blah, blah. So of course we should do that everywhere. And you just don't have to do it necessarily absolutely everywhere. Yeah, you only have so much time, and you're just, some of what you end up doing is just driving everybody crazy. You're dealing with a great product founder when they want to reinvent HR. You're like, okay, well, should be actually a question I ask when I meet with founder CEOs. How do you feel about HR? It needs to be reinvented. Great, good. This is probably going to work.